Today was an awesome episode of Frame Breakers. We sat down with MJ Smith. She's the CMO of a software company called CoLab. They're an 80-person team, Series A, and backed by Insight Venture Partners. And before that, she was the VP of Growth at Refine Labs, one of the best B2B marketing agencies that works in the startup ecosystem. We had a really candid conversation about some of the people that have been most important to her in her career and what they've taught her. MJ also creates amazing LinkedIn content that gets a bunch of engagement. So I asked her about what her process is like. And there's a pretty fun story about how she usually connects her posts to country songs, as well as one really memorable takeaway about focusing on the quantity of memorable content more than anything else. We also talked about her playbook for joining as a CMO at an early stage company, where she focuses typically on paid ads and events because she can get some quick wins on the board right away. And she has some pretty funny stories about some mistakes they made early on in their event strategy, but how they've corrected that and how they approach events today that makes them a lot more successful for CoLab. If you're a B2B marketing leader, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And if you get just a little bit of value from this, the best thing you can do is pay it forward by sharing with someone else that you think might get some value, or subscribing to us on YouTube or Spotify, and just generally spreading the love. All right, let's get into the episode. We are back with another episode. I am very, very excited for this one. I'm joined today by MJ Peters. She is one of the most notable voices on LinkedIn to her 19,000 followers. She's also the CMO at CoLab Software, an 80-person software company, Series A, backed by Insight Ventures. She's also formerly the VP of Growth at Refine Labs, and they churn out some of the best marketing content and have some of the best clients that you'll see. So she's got a great background, and I know you've delved into many of the early stage companies before that. So very excited to pick your brain on a lot of things. Say welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very excited. So let's start with just kind of your background so people can get a better sense of who you are. So what people or what roles have had the biggest impact on your career, and what did they teach you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this ahead of time, and I'm going to focus on people. And there's three. So the first person that I was lucky enough to encounter is this guy named Andy Midland, who I know also had an enormous impact on Chris Walker at Refine Labs. But he is the person that really helped me understand the value of customer insights and taught me how to go about collecting customer insights via customer research. He had his early career was Procter & Gamble, which many people consider to be the best marketing company in the world. And then he went to B2B after that and took, many of those B2C customer insights best practices and applied them in like the semiconductor world. Had a really successful career there, and then does a lot of mentoring now. And I was lucky enough to cross paths with him and be one of his mentees. He made a huge impact on me. And, everything that I did to propel my career basically came back to customer research and customer insights. So really, really fortunate to have met Andy about 6 or 7 months into my career at like 22. Very shortly thereafter, also met Chris. And Chris, for me, was that person who was like always like 2 or 3 steps ahead in terms of where he was in his career and where I was in my career. So I was kind of like Chris's intern, or like I was a rotational graduate development program, and I like worked for him for a little while. So I could kind of like learn from some of the early stuff he was doing at the time, like controversial like digital marketing stuff in a manufacturing setting. So that's what really drew me to the whole world of digital and demand gen. I did end up becoming his first customer at Refine Labs when I was running marketing in-house at a manufacturing company. And then obviously I went and worked with him for a little while at Refine Labs. And then the third person is Mark Osborne, who was the first CEO I ever worked for. And that was at a manufacturing company called Firetrace, where I was leading marketing. He just had an impact on me because he had such a well-developed leadership style that like really matched his personality. And so a big learning that I had from him was developing a leadership style isn't about like copying what other leaders do. It's about finding the things that are authentic to your own personality. And he did that so well. And so it was a very important time for me in terms of how I was developing and growing as a leader. It was really my first big leadership role. And to be able to learn from someone with such a keen sense and an authentic leadership style at that moment in time in my career was really, really valuable. So those are the three people that I really think about in terms of who made a big impact on me.
That's awesome to hear. So now that you're in this, you're the top person, right, on the marketing team. Like what have they excuse me, what have they done to shape you as a leader, and any kind of quirks that you have as a leader now?
Yeah. I mean, one of the parts of Mark Osborne's style that I adopted because I liked it about his leadership style, but I also felt that it was authentic to me and my personality, is being able to convey your thoughts really clearly in a small number of words. And it took a lot of practice. Like when I decided I want to be good at that, I think it would be a good leadership quality to have. I wasn't good at it. And so I did a lot of practice, and I learned from him and saw him model this trait. But since then, I've had people like actually comment on it. Like, yeah, you seem to be able to convey what you're thinking without like rambling or circling around the point too much, right? And so hopefully I can actually walk the talk on this podcast now. I feel like that's something that I practiced a lot and learned from him.
So I very much agree with that as just the trait of very smart people, I should say. I had an English teacher in high school who like wasn't your typical English teacher. He was like Princeton, not an English teacher at like a public school, at least. He was a Princeton grad, like a wrestler, and then like got into Wall Street and like bond trading, and then came back to his alma mater to teach high school English for a few years. And there was that quote he gave me, which was that what was it? Brevity is the soul of wit. And that stuck. Like I think about that one almost every single day when I'm writing or when I'm trying to communicate stuff. How do you have any ways that you try to teach that to people? Because I think it's a really tough skill, but it does, for me, it's like a hallmark of people that are great at communication.
Yeah, the one thing that I feel like I personally had to learn and overcome is you have to give people credit that they are kind of smart enough to fill in the blanks if you leave blanks. So like you have to make like rational leaps when you're putting together a complex argument. And my natural tendency early on, before I practiced communication, was to like literally take people on the exact journey and connect all the dots. And it leads to a very long argument that you're making. What I've realized is that you can leave out some of those rational connections, and people, I mean, most audiences are going to be smart enough to make them on their own, which means that you basically convey the exact same thought in a lot fewer words.
Yeah, I think that hits on the head. When you start to take things out, you realize it doesn't change the story. It actually just makes it better often. And I don't know, I would get a lot of feedback even from my wife that like, oh, your stories are taking too long. And I was like, no, these details are important. And then if you like take an honest look, you realize those details aren't nearly as important, and you can skip a lot of parts and just stick to the meatiest pieces, and it makes you a much more effective communicator.
Yeah, I would say the other thing for me is like I just let go of the need to find the perfect word. You've probably, if somebody listened to this podcast carefully, they would probably have heard me do it already. Like I catch myself seeking to find the perfect word, and then I sort of realize like, no, the second best or third best word will do just fine. No one's going to remember the exact word that you said anyway. And so I just fill it in with the first word that is a synonym that comes to my head, and I keep going, keep talking.
The progress is more important than the perfect word. I think those are great lessons for anyone that's trying to improve some of their communication or even just work on their own copywriting. All right, I want to spend some time in a minute going through some of like the marketing programs and just like dive into your expertise. But something that is top of mind for everyone right now is creating content on LinkedIn. And so I want to dive into your process a little bit. So can you kind of take us through step by step what your process is for creating content on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I think that I naturally engage in a lot of self-reflection or reflection in general. So like I do find my mind like wandering and trying to pattern match when I'm like not actively engaged in work. And so usually when I come up with an idea, especially the good ideas, the posts that really take off, it's when I'm like out on a walk or something, or like in the grocery store, and so my process is more about when I happen to have good ideas, I will kind of jot them down in the notes app in my phone. I'll basically write like 3 very not formed sentences. And that it becomes enough to like jog my memory later. So when I sit down and I decide to actually write a post, I don't have to like come up with an idea on the spot. I have like this bank of ideas, and I can write about what I'm interested in or excited about among those ideas. And like usually what will come to me when I actually like inspiration strikes is like the kind of outline of a good hook or the outline of a good punchline. And so it's nice to the pressure to be off that I don't have to think of those in the moment, because in my opinion, those are the most important parts of the post. And the last thing I'll say is like the hook and the punchline, since we're on this topic, like I take inspiration from very weird places. So like, for example, I listen to a lot of country music. And just like a lot of music where the lyrics are very clear and important, like the lyrics are the main bedrock of the song. And they're just songs where like the lyrics are such a punchline. And those are like, for me, the reason that I love that song. And so I actually try to do that in my writing. Like I try to put punchlines in there that people will remember and that will like resonate with people the way like musical lyrics resonate with me.
That's, first of all, that's amazing. Second of all, all right, spill some details. Like what's a country song with a punchline that you love, and then I would love to just an example of one of your posts where that kind of inspired the punchline.
Okay, so I don't map like an exact lyric to an exact like what I'm trying to say. But what I'll do is like I find that the punchlines in songs that tend to resonate with me are kind of like when you have a long kind of descriptive series of sentences or lyrics followed by like a very short, punchy summary. And so like if you went back and looked at some of my posts, you might find that pattern of like I take the time to fully explore the idea, but then I just like put a little pin in it at the end with like a 5-word sentence. So that's how the punchlines kind of show up in my content.
And I noticed kind of the way that you were talking about this is you're talking a lot about some of like the structure of the posts and noticing structure in whether it's the country songs or whatever it is. Do you have any kind of background in writing or literature, or is this just something that you kind of picked up along the way?
Just kind of picked it up along the way. I mean, my mom is a radio DJ, so I was around music a lot growing up. And when I was very young, I also really liked writing poetry. Like I never really did anything with it in my career, but I think that's like an early indicator that these kinds of patterns resonated with me.
Yeah, right. Some people talk, especially around copywriting, like try to make your copy sing and find like the balance of things there. And so if you've practice writing enough poetry, I imagine that certainly helps. So you're you're taking these notes down in the notes app, and then are you organizing your thoughts anywhere else, or is there a staging area like a Notion doc or Google Doc or anything like that you're posting things in, or is it just as you get these ideas, you jot down notes in the app and then you draft them day of?
Yeah, that's it. I draft them day of. I usually have a backlog of maybe like 3 or 4 posts at any time. But for me, like the quantity of posts or the frequency of posts is not that important, because the main purpose for my LinkedIn, honestly, in my career right now is the ability to recruit great people. If I open a role, I usually get like at a minimum 10 or 15 applicants that find out about the role from my LinkedIn. And in the last couple of roles, it was probably closer to 40 or 50 applicants that found out about the role from my LinkedIn. And because that's my goal, I don't feel like I'm on the hook to be posting every day. So I don't feel like I need any kind of complicated approach to it. I just I post when I have something interesting to say, and when I don't, I don't.
Yeah, I think that's really good to hear your lens, and like the strategic piece of this is as a recruiting tool, which makes a lot of sense, right? People respect your opinion. They want to come work for you when they hear you or see that you post about some of this stuff. Is there, and then I guess, so from a frequency, it's as things come, do you set aside any amount of time on a weekly or daily basis for this stuff? Or again, it's just kind of, you make the time as this stuff comes up?
I just make the time as it comes up. I mean, like I'm very intense about time management. I think it's very important for me. So I use this app called Motion, and it's like a kind of a dynamic time blocking system. So I put like all the stuff I want to get done every day in there, and like it moves around calendar blocks for me and suggests when I should work on stuff, but I'm not like locked into working on X thing at X time. So one of the things I put in there is like write a LinkedIn post, right? I kind of have it set up so that it's like write a LinkedIn post is optional, right? But if I'm working through all my tasks and I have like a block in my day where I've kind of worked through a lot of the stuff that I wanted to get done that day and it's near the end of the day, or like, I only have 20 minutes between meetings or whatever, I'm not going to get something else done. I'll just kind of look at that backlog and LinkedIn, write your LinkedIn post is one of the things that like I can do in those shorter time periods. And so that's one way I prompt myself to take something out of the backlog and put it down on paper, if you will.
Okay. All right. Very cool. I think, and probably a lot of people that will feel relieved to hear that, because everyone always hears that like you have to feed the algorithm, you have to make time to post every single day. So I think there'll be a lot of people that will know that you can create a strong following and an audience and not have to post every single day and just focus on the stuff that is quality.
Yeah, I always encourage people to think not about like the quantity of content, but the quantity of memorable content, because you could post 7 times a week and only 2 of those posts could be memorable, and somebody else could post 2 times and both of them could be memorable, and you would be creating the same amount of really memorable impressions in your ideal customers' minds, right? So it's more important to have high quality than quantity, I think, if you look at it that.
Yeah, the memorable content as the filter makes a lot of sense. You said one other thing that I found interesting is that you're very intense about time management. So I'm curious, how does that translate to how you manage your day-to-day at work, and does that spill over into your personal life at all?
Well, you have already experienced my time management intensity in that I told you that I only do 1 podcast a month, and I booked it really far out for you. So thank you for putting up with that. Honestly, the reason that I became intense about time management is because when I was at Refine Labs and we were scaling from like 3 million ARR to 15 in 9 months, I just kind of like reached this point where there's so much coming at me at all times that I started to become unreliable. And for me, this goes back to leadership style. The number one most important thing for me in leadership is 2-way accountability. I cannot ask people on my team to be accountable to me if I am not always accountable to them. And so what I found was I started to slip up in terms of my own accountability to my team, and they were having to remind me to do stuff. And I, like, from a values perspective, that was unacceptable to me. And so I had to put this time management philosophy in place as a way to effectively manage my own mental load as an exec in a scaling company. And yeah, like I applied it first in work, but now I do apply it also in my personal life, and it does help relieve some of the mental pressure of personal life agenda as well.
Yeah, I find that I have a tendency to, there's certain things from my work life that I will take into my personal life in terms of like how I structure things or like how I try to solve problems. My wife sometimes like that, oftentimes does not. But I think what you said there about the 2-way accountability, one, that's an incredibly good evergreen principle for all leaders to think about. I totally agree. And the one time I got like a negative performance review from a leadership standpoint was dealing with the exact same thing, where I became overwhelmed with the amount of work that I was doing, and I just wasn't being accountable to my own team. I wasn't getting back to their emails on time. They were trying to reach me on Slack, and they didn't know when I was going to respond, and that I immediately changed my mindset and the way that I viewed managing my own time. But it took that same, like a very similar type of experience to get me to that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if like a lot of successful leaders have had that exact same experience.
Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about what you guys are doing at CoLab. So, what are the marketing programs that you guys are spending the most amount of resources on right now?
LinkedIn, paid social, conferences, and I'm gonna put outbound in there because the SDR team does report up to me. So those are our 3 sources.
Okay, so let's focus on events and paid social for a minute here. Were those top priorities when you got there, or did they become priorities over the last year and change?
No, they were not. Neither of them were top priorities. I mean, the top priority was let's get some pipeline. And the other top priority was like, let's really clarify and upgrade our messaging. So there's two priorities. And so paid social and conferences are there are two very quick ways to start putting reliable points on the board in an early stage environment. I think content is amazing and we're investing in it now, but it takes a longer time, right? So if you need to put points on the board early, I think paid social and conferences are two really good ways to do that. So I wouldn't say those two things were the priority when I showed up, but they were the two ways that I knew reliably could hit that number one priority, which is put some points on the board from a pipeline perspective.
So let's talk through the paid social for a second. You guys didn't really have a paid social strategy when you got there. Walk us through kind of the step-by-step journey of what it looked like building the initial strategy to where you guys are today.
Yeah. So the way I look at paid social is it's like such a fast, effective distribution method. And so you're paying for the speed and you're paying to overcome the numbers game of, if you get your message in front of 100 people, probably one of them will be motivated enough to like enter a buying decision. And so really what we use paid social for is to take the customer insights, translate those into messaging, and then like blanket that messaging to the people that we feel need to hear it, right? All of the people in our ICP. And then what we do is we use validated messaging, but then we test like how that messaging shows up and we test it really fast, right? So you can have one core value prop or one core message, and there might be like 7 or 8 or 20 like sub messages that are kind of like slivers of that core message and like different angles to look at it at. And what the specific angle that's going to resonate with a person is going to really depend on their circumstances. And so you almost have to try all of them really fast, right? And then you can be more or less effective at how well it comes across, how well you translate it both visually and via copy. And so to me, the key early on is just rapid experimentation. So that's what we did. We have a designer on our team. We had a designer on our team when we first started this journey. And we also have somebody who wears a lot of hats, but one of the things he does is manage the website. And then we used an agency for the actual like paid social, like setting up the campaigns. They also helped us with extra creative help too. And so in the early days, we were testing new creatives, probably 12 to 15 new creatives every 2 weeks. We would launch, even with the agency, right? And agencies can sometimes be slower than that. This one was quite fast, in my opinion. And so we would rotate it through based on the use cases for our product. So really middle of the funnel kind of solutions-based messaging, and the ads would point to solutions pages that basically expanded on how you could use CoLab to improve this kind of business process in your company. And we just, at first, we were probably breaking even or maybe even losing a little money on the investment, but we experimented fast. We did more of what was working. We got to the point where we're probably returning 1 for 1, breaking even, and then all of a sudden $2 of revenue for every $1 of spend, and now we're probably $4 or $5 of revenue for every $1 spent on that platform.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So 12 to 15 new creatives every 2 weeks, and I'm assuming like the good ones stick around, but you replace the low performers. So it might not be 12 to 15 brand new ones, but you're testing 12 to 15 at a time for 2-week periods.
Yep, exactly. And the other thing we do, so we have 2 layers in our kind of campaign structure. One is evergreen, one is testing. And so we put all the testing stuff on testing, and the stuff that works well, we move it to evergreen. We leave it on all the time. This is an oversimplification, but like that's basically how it works. And then we hired a full-time demand gen manager about 9 months in. So now we launch more like weekly. He wants to get to daily, but with the agency, we're launching twice a month. And he runs this process called Beat the Best Ad. And so he'll pick the ads that are performing the best, and then he uses those as like the basis for a creative brainstorm. So we basically try to, as the name would imply, beat the best ad. So we try to come up with an ad that's similar but has just a little bit better performance based on the stuff that's already working.
Oh, that's awesome. I like the concept of beat the best ad, right? It's just kind of trying to raise your own bar. So was there, and then as you guys have been going through this journey, I mean, it sounds like a pretty steady climb. Were there any kind of aha moments or realizations as you were doing this, particularly on the LinkedIn side, that changed how you guys were doing things?
Well, I will say one aha moment for me has been the thing that moves the needle the most is when you find that one breakout piece of creative. So the first time that this happened for us was probably like April of this year. We ran this ad. It's never the one you predict. We ran this ad that was a picture of a floppy disk, and it said, like, does your design review process feel like it's still stuck in the 90s? And I was like, I approved like all creatives, right? I like, if I can't find like an actual reason why I think they're like, this is false, based on like things I know about the customer, like I don't assume that I have the best ideas. The best ideas could come from anywhere. And I feel like a lot of CMOs, like they kill too much creative. And so this was one of those examples of creative where I was like, this is kind of weird, but whatever, we'll try it. And we tried it, and we got so many hand raisers that responded to that ad. And since then we've had a couple more like that. But it's amazing the impact that one breakout creative can have on your overall results. So like in some regards, what we kind of try to do now is find the next breakthrough creative, right? That's like one of the things we think about when we're making new campaigns.
That's awesome. That's great. And I think your point too on, don't, unless you're finding something that's so wrong with it, like don't shoot down the creative. I think there's probably a lot of people that need to hear that message, and there's probably a lot of designers and demand gen folks that will be happy to replay that to their managers, because I think you're right. Like you never quite know, and I'm assuming too, you probably, while you're at Refine Labs, you probably saw that same thing play out across your clients sometimes as well, right? Where the thing that you didn't necessarily expect was the one that popped, and that's what you double down on.
Yeah, and I mean, equally in the agency environment, you have a lot of clients who do kill a lot of creatives, right? They kill a lot of creative ideas. And I mean, sometimes the client actually does know better, right? Like whatever creative you made is based on like a concept that is not actually accurate. That's fine. You can kill those. But I think some people are just like scared to take a risk. And sometimes those breakout campaigns are hiding in those ideas that feel risky or just like odd, you know?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that story. That's awesome. And then what about on the event side? Like where walk us through kind of the same thing, step by step, where events were when you started and how you kind of built that strategy out to where it is today.
Events were way scarier to commit to, honestly, because it's like it's more of like a chunk investment, you know, like with social, you can kind of scale it up and down, and you kind of like wade into it slowly. But if it's like events, you have to spend probably 15 or 20K minimum to like even try it. So that's like a scary experiment. But we chose, I think we did 6 this year. And like, I think we started by doing 2 in Q4 of last year and just seeing how they went, and they went pretty well. Both from like, we learned a lot about the market and the customers, and we advanced deals already in the pipeline, and also from a pipeline generation perspective. So because those 2 went well, we committed to do 6 this year. The first 2, we just like made every mistake in the book that you can make when you're prepping for an event, you know, like just like the classic events checklist. We just didn't have one. So we kind of like scrambled our way through it. And then, you know, after we had done a couple and gotten them under our belt, we had a better approach to like creating the content. We tried to select events that we were able to speak at. So we were a little bit more polished in terms of like what types of content we would present, and who was presenting them, and how they were prepared, and also like just the logistics of like lead follow-up and how we managed all of that and on what timeline. And so we've gotten better at it throughout the year, and it's been I mean, if you can have a face-to-face conversation with 100 people in your ICP, like you're pretty likely going to walk away with like 20 good conversations and like 4 or 5 like really solid post-show ops. And so it's just a reliable way to get ops in the pipeline for us.
How are you guys choosing the events to go to? But like obviously that you can get a chance to speak at, but beyond that, like how are you figuring out which ones to go to?
Yeah, so for us, it's like what percentage of the people that are going to be there are going to be our ICP. And I think like people don't think about this enough, because like a lot of the big, huge events, they're attended by like all kinds of functional areas. But like I find often in the manufacturing world, operations and sales are like the most common job title that will be at these events. And that's not our ICP. Functionally, like we sell to the engineering org. So my challenge was like, how do you find events where most of the people there are in the engineering org? And actually the most reliable way to do that was to look at the other software companies that sell to the same ICP we do, and then go on their websites and find which events they're going to and just go to those.
That is like very tactical, like a great tip. I think that I will probably use myself. That's awesome. Thank you for that. And then you said some like the common mistakes. Like, what were like some of the like, dude, how did we make that mistake that you think back to now?
Oh, well, like one of the shows, we sent our box of stuff to the show, and it's like got a little padlock on it. And nobody sent the key, and so we had to like get the maintenance guy from the hotel to open the box with bolt cutters. So like that's one. Put a combination lock on your trade show booth thing that you ship down there. But like. Remember to make sure that everyone knows how the lead scanning operation works. Like some shows have lead scanning, some don't. Sometimes you have to rent it from the show. Sometimes you download an app on your phone. It's like sometimes you get a device from them. So it's different from show to show. So like whoever the one or two main people that are going to represent your company, they should have all that information ahead of time. They shouldn't be like scrambling to hunt it down from you at the show.
Yeah, I think that like little things like that, the little details, and that's like in any events, whether like you're throwing a dinner party or you are doing some type of B2B event, there's always like these tiny little details that you have to be aware of. But it sounds like you guys are probably much more expert at it now than you were a year ago.
Yeah, it was funny. At the last one we went to, we set up the booth, and we have one of those booths that's like you kind of put together the skeleton, and then you pull this cloth like banner over the whole thing. And we had and then we pulled out the steamer that we pack in the case, and we steamed all the wrinkles, and the people in the booth next to us were like, wow, that's like professional right there. And we were like, yeah, you should have seen us earlier this year.
Well, that is what we call operational excellence, is bringing your own steamer to the events. That's awesome. All right, so I'm curious. I know that this kind of like R&D mindset is something that Chris from Refine Labs talks about a lot, right? And like thinking about experimentations and things that you might want to test out. What are some marketing ideas or experiments that you really want to try but you haven't yet?
Yeah, I am very interested in how marketing in CoLab can better support expansion. And because we have a land and expand sales motion, and I would love to get to a place where we have very compelling like customer marketing content offers that we can use as a great excuse to set up an on-site with our existing customers. So like, hey, we'd love to come do an on-site, and we're going to present like this amazing new data set that benchmarks you against all of the other customers in our portfolio, and like it's going to be personalized to you using your data from the app as well as like the general trends across the app, right? Like having something really cool and interesting to present that kind of gets you on site with the customer to do some more relationship building is something that I would like to figure out how to like get off the ground. Well, first I got to figure out if it works, because it's just an idea I'm excited about right now. And then if it does work, then we can figure out how to make it repeatable.
How do you think you would go about doing that? I have some thoughts too, just because I spoke to someone else on the podcast recently, someone named Kason Goranson, who's VP marketing, and she did something similar to this. But I'm curious if you have any ways that you think that you'd like to make this work.
I think like probably I will just be personally involved and work with our head of CS, who's also our chief strategy officer. And she and I will just sink what may seem to other people like an unreasonable amount of time into creating like the best deck ever for one customer. And then like basically once we've done it once, we'll reverse engineer the process and see what parts of it we can delegate to other people. But back to Chris's ideas around revenue R&D, that's like one of the ways that I think about building in an early stage marketing program. It's like you as the VP or the CMO or the head of marketing or whatever, like you should be for a decent amount of time like one of the most valuable players on the team, right? And you should roll up your sleeves and get involved and do stuff, and then you should backfill yourself, right? And I think Dave Gerhardt talks a lot about this approach as well. It's definitely what I subscribe to. And so yeah, I'm not afraid to like just do it myself the first time, and it's also kind of fun. I enjoy doing marketing, and then figure out how to like backfill and scale it after I've done it once or twice.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And on the like the tactical side of things, what Kason was saying was they ended up it was her idea, but she wasn't getting buy-in from people that this was a worthwhile endeavor to like spend marketing resources on retention basically, or expansion. And what she ended up doing was just looking at some intent data from the landing pages of the site on what pages people were visiting, were they visiting certain features pages, were they looking at integrations pages, using some tools to see if they were researching competitors, and then from there they gave like a weekly report to the CS team so they could be more proactive on customer conversations with those customers, and then also in their customer newsletter they had a dynamic field that they would replace with whatever was like the thing that was most important to that customer based on some of this intent data. So I thought, like, I was talking to someone about this yesterday and they were really intrigued by it. And I think I agree, marketing can have a big impact on retention and expansion, but for some reason there's like a mental block with a lot of orgs that it shouldn't be spent there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I think early on, right, you can't expand a customer that you don't land. So early on, I think it makes sense to focus on the land, but expand, I mean, depending on what kind of product you sell and how expensive it is, expand can be a huge growth lever as you kind of pick up momentum and grow as a company.
Yeah. Was there, since you've been at CoLab or even this year, were there any low ROI channels that you ended up cutting?
Yeah. So within our paid social, we ran like an ABM motion, and I posted about this on LinkedIn, and it went viral, and I got invited on like 3 podcasts to talk about it, and we killed it. And so I just thought that was funny. And I don't, like, in retrospect, I don't think it's like this is like a condemnation of ABM as a motion in general. But the way we did it was we would pick like 5 accounts all in the same vertical. We made a landing page specifically with messaging for them, like based on stuff we found in their annual report, stuff like that. Then we made like dedicated creatives and then ran the creatives and pointed them to that landing page. And it did work pretty well in terms of the efficiency of distributing messaging about our product. So like the click-through rate to the landing page is much higher than our broad-based messaging, which kind of makes sense. But like it wasn't super effective in terms of generating hand raisers and conversions. And I think it was just a numbers game, honestly, because, if you had a 200,000 person audience and you're now advertising to like a 2,000 person audience, then just the likelihood of somebody who's ready to buy software right now being in that audience is now just artificially lower. So is your messaging going to be so much better that it counteracts for that? Well, what we found is at least the messaging we tried was not, right? It was good enough that it vastly improved the click-through rates, but it wasn't good unk that it vastly improved the amount of hand raisers. So we pivoted back to more of a broad-based messaging approach after that. There's some other things I would change about our approach to the messaging going forward if we were to try that again. So I'm not writing off ABM entirely, but our first stab at it was not super high ROI compared to some of the other stuff we're doing.
Yeah, the kind of like the expected value of going broad-based versus niching down to those handful of customers. You weren't seeing it in like the late-stage pipeline or the revenue, which makes sense. What do you think? And I ABM's maybe not like quite as hot of a topic as it was maybe a few years ago, but when it was first coined and people wanted to talk about it all the time. But it always feels like this thing that people talk about that everyone should be trying in an enterprise environment. But so often I feel like there's similar stories where you just don't hear that people are able to execute it very well. And I think it's probably because it's so complex to actually do at scale, right? Because it's essentially creating personalized content for many different people, which is always going to be difficult. But like, what do you think there are any secrets or like keys to having a really successful ABM program?
I think what I will try next, I don't know if there's secrets or keys because I personally don't think I've been super successful with ABM before. So I think what I will try next, having listened to that like blockbuster How Snowflake Does ABM podcast that Dave Gerhardt did. Obviously Snowflake is a much bigger and more mature company than CoLab, so there's a lot of things I could learn from that. It felt like just their commitment to like unlocking certain customers over the course of a quarter or a year was like the number one factor. And so to me, like that's also just risky for a small company, right? Because the reason we backed away from it was because we had to spend an outsized amount of resources and it wasn't returning the investment as fast as the kind of broad-based stuff. And I feel like that becomes less of a problem when you become a bigger company, because you've got so many like big foundational programs that deliver so much pipeline that like the amount of resources to run some ABM campaigns isn't going to make or break you. I think the less risky like half step that I'm thinking about is really that customer marketing play, right? Like, so let's prove out the like really strong dedication to a particular customer and making a bunch of custom stuff from them with customers we already have, because creating an expansion op is probably more likely than creating a new land op. And then whatever works with the customers, let's see if we can try similar stuff on a few prospects and generate land opportunities that way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think I'm hoping that you have much better results than that. Like, I'm also hoping that we can talk about this from a year from now and see what that case study looks like, because that seems to make a lot of sense. So let's talk, you've been in a few different early stage orgs and you've seen them from, I think, the agency side as well. What typical mistakes do you see early stage marketing orgs making the most?
I think the biggest mistake you can make is just like not doing stuff fast enough. And I think in particular, it's like the last 10% of a project. I think a lot of teams like do all the work up to the last couple of things you need to actually get it in front of a customer. And so like we just highly value shipping stuff in our culture at CoLab. And I think that has helped us like rapidly get customer feedback, figure out what works and what doesn't work a lot faster than maybe a lot of marketing teams do. And then the other thing is I feel like people do not respect the numbers game enough. And like one thing I talked about in terms of paid social is it's like one of the best way to overcome the numbers game, which is that out of every 100 people, even if you put the perfect messaging in front of them, still only one of them is going to be a motivated buyer today, right? And so that means that you need to put perfect messaging in front of a bunch of cohorts of 100 people to get X amount of leads, right? If you need 10 leads, you have to put perfect messaging in front of 1,000 people. Well, putting perfect messaging in front of 1,000 people might look like putting pretty good messaging in front of 100,000 people that happens to be perfect for a 1,000 person subset, right? And so the numbers game kind of like stacks up quickly. And I think a lot of companies, like they try to build a content program first. And I think one of the biggest problems with the content program is it's really hard to get the scale on it that you want quickly to like overcome that numbers game. So the approach we've taken is to use the channels that overcome the numbers game first. And then now we're kind of going backwards and building the content engine as well. Because I think there's a lot of good reasons to build a content engine too. It's just, I think the fastest way to generate regular pipeline is to respect the numbers game.
That is a great takeaway. And I'm taking that one personally to heart, because I mean, the purpose of this podcast is partially to create content for my company, Remote Growth Partners, but it's also like selfishly for me to learn a lot from incredibly smart people like you that have deeper marketing experience than I do. And but I've dragged my feet on paid social, particularly on LinkedIn, and seeing hearing you talk about some of this stuff and seeing some of our clients and how they're starting to build their programs from scratch is inspiring me, that I need to just start and ship something and test and iterate on that. And I finally have someone internally that can manage that for me as well. So this is my public committing to testing out paid social for RGP myself. So thank you for that, because I think you're right. Like the numbers are the numbers. You get quality from quantity, and you just don't know when the timing is right with a buyer. And like you can get all the intent signals in the world, but you have to send enough messages or post or spend enough money to get these things out in front of people. One other thing I want to talk about is you managing the SDR team. Have you managed SDRs before?
No, this is my first time.
Okay, tell me what this has been like, because this is partially my role, because I came from a sales background and then got into marketing. But what has this transition been like for you?
Yeah, so we have an SDR manager who reports to me. So all the SDRs do not report to me, and that's good because I personally don't like to have more than 5 direct reports. Sometimes I do have more than 5 direct reports, but I think the rule of thumb is you shouldn't have more than 8. That's like the conventional wisdom. I personally have found I don't really like to have more than 5. So if all the SDRs reported to me, that would be too many people. But it's been cool. Like, I mean, I think it makes sense to have SDRs in the marketing org. I think it can also make sense to have them in sales org, but I think really you need like two things to have a successful SDR org. One is you need to have like great people management. Whoever's leading the SDR team needs to like to be a people manager. I would say no other role compares to the SDR leader role in terms of the amount of people management you do every day. So that means like if you're the marketing leader, you have to like people management because you're going to manage people, but you also have to love marketing, right? And if you kind of like people management and you love marketing, you could probably still be a good marketing leader. If you don't like people management, you are not going to be a good SDR leader because it's all people, right? It's a people-powered engine. So you got to love people management. And what I do, and I think there's probably a bias towards just how I operate generally, is I give a lot of messaging enablement to the SDR team. So I try to once a quarter give like a 45-minute training on some like nuanced topic within our messaging stack, and then do like a 45-minute follow-up where every SDR on the team will apply that messaging to like an email cadence or a cold call, and then we'll all like share like the application of the messaging principle with each other, and we'll critique and give feedback. So it's like learn something new, apply it immediately to like kind of cement it, and that's how I help the SDR level up their messaging.
That's really cool to hear. I think there's probably not a lot of CMOs that are getting into the nitty gritty with their SDR teams like that and doing that level of training. They even if the SDR teams are reporting up into them, what kind of feedback have you gotten on those types of sessions?
The SDRs love them. I would say our SDR team is fairly unique in that it's like a lot of people with a lot of work experience. I think people tend to treat the SDR function as like an entry-level kind of role. We hire often like people with engineering backgrounds that are just transitioning into SaaS. And so they have more work experience. They pick things up super fast, and they really enjoy like having a little bit more leeway to adapt the messaging. And so I think our SDR team has like a high level of mastery of outbound, which I wouldn't really have it any other way. I think the SDR motion should be like spear fishing, not like like a lighthouse where you're projecting the message all out, because that's what you do with demand gen. So yeah, they enjoy them, and I think it's directly applicable to like the SDR strategy here at CoLab.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, let me get you out here on this. What is one marketing lesson or marketing piece of advice that you think about almost every single day?
Gotta understand your customers. It's probably the only piece of marketing advice that I would even like come close to thinking about every day. But that guy I mentioned all the way at the top of the episode, this kind of coming in full circle, Annie Midland. I challenge myself to like think about for every marketing campaign, like, is this truly rooted in customer insight? How could we make this more applicable to customers? How could we get customer feedback on it? And how can we do all of that without slowing down the rate of shipping stuff?
What are you doing to yourself to like continuously educate or stay on top of the stuff that's most important to your customers?
And you could always do more. But I mean, I think I've gone to a lot of conferences myself. And so one of the biggest learning areas for me has been being the person standing in the booth, having to pitch the product over and over and over again, right? Like you adapt how you're talking about it. So I do that. I can see people's like reactions face to face in real time. And then I come back and I tweak the messaging in terms of how we're delivering that messaging digitally.
I think that's a great point too, is that every marketer should have to stand at the booth at least one event, right? To have to pitch it and explain the company to 50 to 100 people that day, because you do refine your pitch throughout the day, right? Like hour by hour, as you're starting to see what works and what doesn't work. And that will probably cement a lot of your beliefs in how you should be talking about or messaging about the company in the future.
Yep. This is very strange, and I probably don't recommend that everyone repeats this, but I also actually owned 6 sales opportunities in Q3 this year. So I actually had to do the whole sales process too, which was super helpful in terms of like, does the messaging stand up? What are the objections? Like, what are the things that are a little wonky in the sales process? So that was fun.
You created your own little management training program.
Yes.
Any big takeaways from that, or like reflections from that you were like, oh, I didn't realize this piece of the sales process or how customers were thinking about us?
Oh man, so many. It's probably a whole podcast episode in itself. Probably one that I wouldn't be able to really talk about that openly though.
Yeah, I understand. But that's awesome to hear. Well, this has been amazing. I've been writing down a bunch of notes, and I'm thinking about how like we're going to share some of this stuff. And I'm gonna, speaking of being succinct, I'm gonna have a hard time paring down, I think, to my favorite 2 or 3 takeaways. But this has been awesome. Final plug: where can people find you the most?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I have more unfiltered takes on Twitter too. So I'm MJ Smith on LinkedIn and on Twitter. I changed my name due to marriage like earlier this year. I think you could probably still find me if you put in MJ Peters, but I'm LinkedIn and Twitter.
And I made that mistake at the beginning of the episode. Thank you for correcting me. I had your old name on the podcast software, and then I had in my doc I had MJ Smith, and I froze and got confused at the last second. But thank you for correcting MJ Smith. You can find her on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thank you so much, MJ. This was awesome.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me.